Alrighty, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Lunch and Learn today. My name is Callie Turner, and I'm the Curator of Education here at the Orange County Regional History Center. I'd like to welcome everyone joining us here in person. There's so many of you, as well as everyone joining online. I'll make sure to leave, we'll have some time for questions at the end. So if you are joining in person, I believe, do we have sticky notes on the table, Cheyenne? No sticky notes today. Okay, so just save your questions for the end and we'll go around and take them from you. And if you're online, you can just leave your questions in the chat box and Cheyenne will relay those to us. Well, I'm very excited today because we have a special guest leading our Lunch and Learn today, Mr. Thomas Tart. Mr. Tart is a fifth-generation Floridian. He attended the University of Florida on a football scholarship where he received a BSBA and then later attended Stetson University College of Law. He then moved to Orlando upon graduation and practiced law for 41 years in Orlando. He retired in the summer of 2009. He also worked for a civil practice law firm for 14 years and then 30 years with the Orlando Utilities Commission as House Counsel, Vice President, and General Counsel. He said it was the best of times. He also attended the Army War College as a civilian in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and he served on the Air Force Academy Selection Board in Florida for 12 years. He's been involved in doing many programs for World War II vets and also placing official historic World War II markers at airfields around Florida. His hobbies and interests include World War II, the Civil War and golf, and the philosophy he says he lives by is the golden rule. So if you will, please give us a round of applause for our guest speaker today, Mr. Thomas Tart. You're good.
Thank you very much. Is my lavalier mic on? Good, thank you. I'm honored to be here today. When Treasurer Billy invited me, he told me I was the third person he invited. First, he invited the #1 historian on World War II, and he couldn't come. Then he invited one of the sharp lawyers in the county. He couldn't come. So Billy called me and said, "Tart, will you do Veterans Day talk?" And I said, "Billy, I won't turn you down 3 times in a row." I grew up in Jacksonville, South Side, and across the street from me was Lamar Sarah, head of Silver Springs, Wakulla Springs, and Florida State Theaters. He was captain of the Gator team in 1926, but he was on the team in 24 and 25. The head of that team hadn't been the head of the ROTC at the University of Florida, a veteran of World War I. His name is James Van Fleet. If you go down in Polk County, there's the Van Fleet Trail near where the airplane is. If you go out in West Orange County, there's the Van Fleet Trail for bicycles and for walking. It's named after James Van Fleet. Today I'm going to tell you about one of the great Floridians, James Van Fleet from Bartow. Later I'm going to tell you about a fellow that was in Winter Park over the winter, and I was to have lunch with. Jim Pugh invited me to join him. Jumping Jim Gavin, the youngest general on D-Day. Well, OUC had a problem and I couldn't go to the lunch. But I'm going to tell you about Gavin. And then last, not least, is our World War II veteran here today, 92 years old, fixing to turn, I said 92, 102, fixing to turn 103, Chief Master Sergeant Mel Jenner. Let's hear it for Mel. Wave at him. No, Mel, don't come up. No, Mel, we're not starting yet. No, don't. You don't have to get up. When you're going to speak in a minute, Mel doesn't hear good. He's like, Jeanette, my lady, she doesn't hear good sometimes either. So I know the problem. Well, let's see if we can get this show going. What we're going to talk about is the most important day since Gettysburg, D-Day. And why is it important? We had been to North Africa, and we got beat at Kasserine Pass with a rookie commanding general named Eisenhower. And then we went to Sicily, and Patton did the impossible. He went around the German army But Montgomery, the head of the British armies, got delayed. So Patton took Sicily, but he didn't catch the army. And then we went to Italy with Mark Clark. Mark Clark had a hard time moving up against one of the best German generals. We had not been on the mainland. The Russians said, "You've got to get in this war because they're killing us on the Eastern Front." Kursk was their big battle, a lot bigger than this battle, but the Germans were in stalemate. So D-Day is the first time the American and British Army had been on the continent of Europe. Now, they had been in the war 4 years before we got in, and we had been in the war through 44 4 years. So we'd been at war 8 years, and nobody had knocked out the Germans. And this battle today is the beginning of the end of the Nazi control of Europe and the end of Hitler. And that's why this is so important. So to start with, let me see here. All right, I've got the, we need your computer fella here. Okay, now we're going. Thank you very much. Listen to what he says.
I have spent billions in the last 5 years, and the German people now must know what the purpose of that was. I told my friend Gavin, create an air force which will protect Germany against any force and any attack in the world.
Because he's telling the German people that the reason Goering built the great army, the Luftwaffe, was because they wanted to protect Germany. That was a lie. They wanted to invade Europe and conquer everybody. But he's telling the people the reason we spent all this money to build the Luftwaffe under Goering, World War I hero, was to protect us. Big lie. Churchill had been in the war 4 years. They had their back to the wall. They were the last country that had not fallen. So what does Churchill do? We got in at Pearl Harbor, and he said that's a great day for the British because he knew after Pearl Harbor we were in the war. So he and Roosevelt get together a long time. Churchill believed in Eisenhower. Roosevelt wanted his army commander, Marshall, to head D-Day. But they were both working together, Marshall and Eisenhower. So Churchill comes to Quebec, they're at the Frontenac, and they plan D-Day. This is a year before D-Day. And they agree that we're going to have to take American combat troops who had been in the battle and also rookies. Same thing with Churchill. He'd lost so many men. His two armies and the Canadian army that joined him were partial veterans from the 4 years, Dunkirk, for example, but partially rookies. So we've got a team composed of rookies and veterans, and that's where we're going. So Eisenhower, after having been commander in North Africa, losing at Kasserine Pass, had been commander over Patton there at Sicily and over Mark Clark in Italy. He was a veteran leader. But because El-Alamein Germans were beaten by Montgomery, Montgomery was picked to be the British commander. And this is Montgomery here. This is Eisenhower here. Fortunately, Eisenhower got a British air commander, Marshal Arthur Tedder. Let me tell you what, he believed in Eisenhower. And Eisenhower said, "General, we can't go into D-Day unless we control not only the sea, but we've got to control the beaches." So he says, "Tedder, I want you to get your Air Force and our Air Force, the 8th Air Force, and bomb every airfield in West France. He said, General, why is that? Because they don't have the planes in Western France, but they could bring them in from Germany, from the Pas-de-Calais, where they think we're going to land, and from Norway, and we'll get killed. But if you bomb the runways, they can't land the planes, they can't come and hurt us on D-Day. And then he goes to Ramsey. And this is Ramsey here. Ramsey was an admiral in the British Navy. He says, Ramsey, I want you to bring your ships from South England as far away as Ireland, Northern Ireland, and I want you to land simultaneously on 5 beaches. But more particularly, I want you to bring your battleships not a month ahead of time like we did at Iwo Jima. He said, I want you to open up the bombardment 30 minutes before they land. So the situation was set. Eisenhower had Beadle Smith, his chief of staff, who coordinated with everything. And then he had the old goat, I said old goat, Omar Bradley. Now you say, what's the tie to Florida? Omar Bradley played on the 1915 football team. Eisenhower was the quarterback on the 1915. And guess who the leading fullback was? James Van Fleet from Bartow. That's the class that the stars fell on. Eisenhower also had a guy that wasn't very friendly to America, Air Chief Lee Mallory, shown here. And he did not believe in Eisenhower. But Eisenhower developed a relationship with Churchill. And every time Eisenhower had a problem, he went to see Churchill, or Churchill came to see him. He says, I'll get the admirals and the generals straight. Eisenhower did a very, very good job in doing that. Now, this was the biggest gamble that had ever been played, because we sent through various means information that we were not landing anywhere except 16 miles across at Calais. We made them think, the Germans, by putting Patton as a decoy at the Pas-de-Calais, that we were coming there. One of the people from the Macy's parade made blow-up, instead of dolls, they made blow-up tanks, blow-up trucks, and blow-up jeeps, and they put them there at the Pas-de-Calais. And at night, our men would move them, so when the German reconnaissance came over, they said that army is building up at the Pas-de-Calais. Hitler believed that, and several other actions made him think that we were coming there. The beauty of it is we weren't going there. We were going to the Khotan Peninsula. There's your decoy, James Patton. He was fought in Sicily, and there, after conquering Sicily, he went to a field hospital and saw some of his men who had lost their arms and their legs. And then he saw a guy sitting there with nothing wrong with him. He said, Private, what's wrong with you? I'm scared. What do you mean you're scared? He said, I couldn't go fight. Patton was so upset in that field hospital after seeing those men who were dying, he got his gloves and slapped him. Well, what did the national press do? They hung George Patton, and they wanted him fired and sent back home. But you know what Eisenhower said? He didn't tell the press this. He said, he's my only big fighter. I mean, he's the Jeb Stuart of the Confederate Army. He is my man, and I got to have him. So on D-Day, here's your decoy. He would go to gatherings at the square and talk about how his army was preparing there. They had old men running the radios like they had traffic, and Hitler believed that where Patton went was coming the landing. He was a great decoy. Eisenhower gets a report right before D-Day for Omaha Beach. The Germans had moved from the Russian front, one of their top panzer units and one of their top armies, had moved them across to meet wherever we landed in the Atlantic Wall. Eisenhower knew that, but the troops didn't know it. So what did Eisenhower do? It's hard for me to talk about because he knew that they were going to die. So Eisenhower went to the paratroopers, knowing they were going to lose 60% of their men, and he told them, we've got to go win this battle. He told them that the country depended on him. So what did Jeanette, my number one quarterback, do? She went and got Eisenhower's speech. And I want you to hear this 2 minutes now. Oh. Well, let me try one more time.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savage. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeat in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home front have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Eisenhower knew that some of the men weren't coming home, particularly the paratroopers and particularly the men at Omaha Beach. But he went to them and gave them a pep talk. What you've just seen in the film that Jeanette put together for you are pictures of the two harbors. The closest harbor, and the reason the Germans didn't think we were coming where we came, was Cherbourg. It was 70 miles north. So the British, who weren't maybe as brave as were on the battlefield, but who had better equipment, created two fake harbors, one for Omaha Beach and one for Aramachi after the invasion, so that when our army got ashore, we could bring supplies, because there were no railroads we could use, and Cherbourg we couldn't use at that time, and there wasn't one near between Le Havre and Cherbourg, so he created two of them. What else they did was they brought the parachutists, the 101st and 82nd, in the night before, 13,000 men. The 82nd, under Florida's Gavin, had fought in Italy, and they had fought in Sicily. They were veterans. The 101st, Screaming Eagles, were rookies, but he brought those two in and dropped them that night before to hold different positions. And on your table is a map for you to look at of the various beaches, but it's behind the left side, Utah, that we see what we've done. Now, towards the end, you saw something that I still can't believe. It's two American tanks that sunk. We didn't plan for the rough seas of the English Channel. So on the British tanks, they put an inner tube around it, and a hurricane wasn't going to sink it. What did we do? Put up a little 3-foot curtain to prevent the little waves. Of the 29 tanks that were launched by our ships, 27 sunk, as shown in the earlier picture. And a lot of those men didn't get out. They drowned. Stupid planning. We should have listened to the British. We should have looked at the conditions of the weather, but we weren't as smart as the British in that regard. Now, between Omaha and Utah Beach is Point de Hoc, and that is a very important spot in the battle. These are the paratroopers, 101st, 82nd. They flew in a number of airplanes, and they were veteran, half of the 82nd. However, the pilots were rookies. They had not been through ACAC like the Germans had on the Khotan Peninsula. So over a lot of the drop zones behind the right flank, Utah, they dropped them in the wrong place, and they dropped them scattered. In one way, that was bad, but another way, it was good because the German high command had no idea where in the hell we were going because we had paratroopers everywhere. And it's shown in the Longest Day. John Wayne and his guys got together, and they fought like a bunch of banty roosters. Now, here are the parachutists coming in 1 o'clock at night. Here are they landing. Here is my Winter Park hero, who I didn't get to meet, James Gavin. They called him Jumping Jim because he jumped in 4 different combat battles. The bridge too far, Gavin held bridges, 3 bridges with his unit. He was a great soldier, and he spent his winters here in Winter Park, and Jim Pugh invited me to have lunch with him, and OUC had another thing for me to do that day. One other thing you saw in the film were the bodies. And Omaha Beach, the Germans were ready for us. Rommel had said, we're going to put a stronghold from Spain to Norway, but one of the strongholds was Omaha Beach. Now you say, Thomas, what do you mean by that? In that 4.5-mile beach, they had 14 bunkers, and grab this, 85 machine guns. They didn't have but 21 on the other 3 beaches. This was the stronghold, but it was in the middle of the line. It had to be taken. Gavin, one of my heroes. One of the places was a crossroads, kind of like maybe a little town about the size of Poplar called St. Mary Glees. The 82nd, with Gavin's guys, landed short. Gavin held the bridge from the north to keep the German tanks from coming in on their right flank. But some of the guys landed in the square. Earlier, a German anti-aircraft shell hit a barn and there was a fire. So all the people got the bucket brigade out to put out the fire, and the German soldiers came out of the barracks to watch. Well, about this time, one of our parachute companies landed in the square, and it was a dove shoot. The Germans killed most of our men. In the movie The Longest Day, Red Buttons plays this paratrooper who landed on the church steeple. A German on the ground shot him through the leg and was fixing to shoot him another time when another paratrooper landed behind him and took his eyes off. Red Buttons played the role, but that soldier sat there, played dead, and watched the whole battle. And what he watched was the slaughter of what the Germans did to us, parachuting down until we got on the ground. And if you go there today to St. Mary Glees, you'll see that paratrooper still hanging on the steeple. Now, on the left flank was the Orne River. It was between the beaches, the 5 beaches, and Paris, between narrowing the English Channel, where most of the German troops were, and the battlefield. The best flying I ever saw on paper, and I've been there 3 times. I actually been to D-Day 4 times, but the best flying I'd ever saw done was by these 3 pilots of these gliders. They were dropped off in complete darkness at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they landed 3 gliders with combat men on board, within 100 yards of that Orne Bridge. Now you say, Thomas, why is this Orne Bridge so important? Because 10 miles down where this red bomb's going off is Sword Beach. The Rangers, British Rangers, were going to land there and come up and reinforce it, but they had to fight their way off the beach. He had to hold the bridge because every German tank in this part of the world could come across that bridge and destroy the left flank of the British Army and roll up D-Day. But what did they do? They landed by the bridge. They set up a command foxhole right here, and some of the men went across the bridge, and the number 2 guy, Lieutenant Brotherton, who was married, had trained 2 years for this mission, was killed. This is tragedy, but he gave his life not only for Britain, but for the invasion. This little building here is now a pub and also part museum, and I've been there, and it stands. About 4 hours later, the Germans hear that we were controlling the Orne River Bridge, critical. So they sent a bunch of tanks down this road here on the far bank to overcome the bridge, to open it up for German troops. Well, guess what? Those paratroopers didn't have artillery. They didn't have big guns, but they carried a little bazooka, and two of them laid in the ditch just down from that home, and they waited till the lead tank went by, and they shot it in the only spot vulnerable on a big German tank, in the motor in the back, and blew it up. Well, the rest of the German tanks said, what in the hell have they got going on up there, and turned around. So two bazooka guys stopped the German tank column. 3 times the British attacked, and 3 times this 115 paratroopers, 130 paratroopers held the Germans off. Well, the commander in his command bunker, which was right here on the other side, said it's over. We're out of ammunition, we have men wounded, and the Germans on this next attack are going to take us. Well, this is where the good Lord comes in. Off in the distance, they hear a bagpipe, and the commander says, what's that? He says, it's a British bagpipe. What do you mean? Would you believe when the guys that landed at Gold Beach heard about these paratroopers being stranded, through the night they fought their way, and they put a bagpipe guy up front to let the people on the bridge know, we're coming to save you. Custer, we're coming to get you out of the hole. Little Bighorn, we're going to be there. And it also gave his men courage, we got to save them. And that day, through a miracle, the bridge was relieved and saved. And it became a critical feature of D-Day. The glider pilots to land in a field at dark, at night, and on the target is amazing. This is the real picture of the bridge. This is where they came across, and this is where Brotherton got killed. Number 2 in charge. But his men took up his sword and they fought there. And this is the little road that the German tanks came down when the British stopped it. I invite you to go there. One of the great historical sites, the Orne River Bridge, there in western France. This is the picture of the battle which is on your table. The one on the table is more accurate. And this is Utah Beach. This is where Gavin and his men, the 82nd, landed. This is what they intended to do. This is where the other beach. And right here is Point de Hoc in between. Gold, British. Juno, Canadian. Sword, British. And this is where the bridge, the 6th Airborne who came in the whole Pegasus Bridge right here. Halfway between Sword and Caen. Now, this is where the crack German unit was. This is where those 14 bunkers were, and the unbelievable number of 85 machine guns right along here. If we lose Omaha Beach, which was questionable for 5 hours, the Germans could attack Utah alone and then crush the right side of the British front. It's critical. They got to hold Omaha Beach. We brought the battleship Nevada from Pearl Harbor there, and off the shore, he bombarded the German guns at Utah Beach. Omaha Beach, we had 2 battleships. We had the Texas and the Arkansas, and they bombed Rommel's gun emplacements, but Rommel was brilliant. He put the gun sideways so no shell could go inside, and they bounced off. Not one gun was taken out by our Navy in that 30-minute bombardment. So what do? We called on Fort Pierce. Fort Pierce, we had trained what they call the frogmen, underwater demolition guys. And we said, you guys have got to blow up. We're going in at low tide. We want you to blow up, as shown in this picture, all the obstacles off the coast so our boats can come in and land on the beach. They had no bulletproof gear. They had no guns. They're out there blowing up munitions. Well, what did the Germans do? If you saw in the picture, the Germans with a rifle, they had tremendous scopes and tremendous rifles. They were killing the frogmen. That day on Omaha Beach, half our frogmen were either shot or severely wounded. They paid the price so that our army could go ashore at Omaha Beach. And if you go to Fort Pierce, I want you to see the museum. It's a great museum just there on the coast where they trained to go ashore at D-Day. Now, let me take you to the battle. The ships. Ships came ashore from landing craft. We made a mistake. We put our boats 10 miles out off the shore because we knew no German artillery could hit our landing craft. Well, guess what? They were high seas, and the men got so seasick before they got to the coast, they were not in good shape. The British, on the other hand, put their landing ships 5 miles off the coast, and they didn't suffer what we did. The British outsmarted us. James Gavin, Summerlin High School, Bartow, fought in World War I, wounded. He was head of ROTC at the University of Florida. The football coach was so bad they fired him and said, Van Fleet, you played fullback for West Point. Will you be our coach? And would you believe James Gavin, as ROTC commander at the University of Florida, had the winningest record till my teammate at Florida, Spurrier, came along. James Gavin, Florida hero. Gavin gets to the beach first because the low tide was up at Utah, then it came on down the line, so he landed first. He got there and he says, damn, we've landed on the wrong beach. They were a mile and a half from where they were supposed to be. But then he listened, and he didn't hear those German machine guns. He heard our paratroopers' carbines. Pow, pow, pow. And he said, darn, the paratroopers, Gavin and the boys, are holding the causeways off of Utah Beach. So up comes his commander, the only general to land at Utah Beach, Teddy Roosevelt Jr. Teddy Roosevelt was the oldest officer landing on D-Day. He had to get permission from his uncle, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he was the son of the guy who in Cuba who took San Juan Hill, Teddy Roosevelt. He's the son of the guy that gave us Yosemite and some of the parks out west. He had big shoes to fill. Although he was partially crippled, he got the president permission to go in and land. He trained his men below Tallahassee at Alligator Point. And as you see here, and here's some of the obstacles, he came in with his men at low tide. He gets up to gets up to Van Fleet and said, what we got? He said, we got good and bad news. Give me the bad news. We landed on the wrong beach. He gets on the radio and is calling Omar Bradley out on the flagship Augusta, bring the second wave to the real Utah Beach, a mile and a half north. Van Fleet says, wait a minute. Listen, those are our guns. We're holding the causeways. The paratroopers have paid the price for us to get off the beach. Teddy Roosevelt then makes the statement of the war. We're going to start the war here and now. And that became the statement. The press loved it because he took command. That day, because of the 9th Air Force coming down the beach at 400 feet, taking out the guns. That day, because we landed at the wrong darn beach. And that day, because James Van Fleet said, let's go here, and Roosevelt agreed, we lost 200 men and landed 25,000 Army guys. Wonderful, wonderful invasion there. This is Omaha Beach, different story. The frogmen, as I told you, tried to knock these obstacles out, and they didn't. The water was rough. These men, and this is one of the few Copa photographs, the award-winning photographer Copa was there, and most of his film, going back to England, got lost in the waves that the ship got wrecked. He only got a few pictures too. This is one of the few real pictures of D-Day, Omaha Beach. And at the top of some of these obstacles, they put mines. So if your boat came ashore and went up there, it blew off the front and killed them in. Rommel had done a very good job. This is one of the few pictures showing you the carnage. This is Robert Mitchum in the movie The Longest Day, portraying General Cota, Norman Cota. Norman Cota was the only one-star on Omaha Beach. And as shown here by Robert Mitchum, he's taken command. he realized that the first waves had been destroyed, and many of the second wave had been destroyed. But he had to get them off the beach, and they had a wall built, concrete wall, so you couldn't go up the sand dunes. So what did Mitchell do? He found the guys that had Bangalore torpedoes, a long pole with ammunition on the end, and he said, stick it under those German fences. They did. They set it off, and they blew a hole, not where the 4 draws were, but in between. And this is Robert Mitchell said, you either going to die here on the beach or you're going to die up there on the cliff. The only beach that had cliffs was Omaha Beach. Norman Coda, as portrayed here by Mitchell, said, let's go. The men had been killed. It wasn't the colonels and the majors and the captains that won Omaha Beach. It was the lieutenants and the sergeants that got them off the beach. And this was the beginning of the end for victory on D-Day. The last hero I'm going to talk about, you're going to hear from in a few minutes, is Chief Master Sergeant Mel Jenner. Now, Mel and I have been friends a long time because of my classmate Gary Durham. Mel flew 46 combat missions out of England over occupied territory. He first flew in the B-20, which became the twin-engine 26, but it was a fast plane, and Mel told me the other day that the Germans couldn't catch him. When he dropped the bombs, they couldn't catch him. But then he went to the B-17, the bombers that trained here at Herndon Airport. He flew 46 missions. He went in and lied about his age. He told him he was older. He went in at 17 years of age. And today, Sergeant Mel is 102, fixing to turn 103. On that last mission, this was his last mission, D-Day. Come on in here, Sergeant. Thank you. He, on the last mission, Mel was on a reconnaissance to photograph the 5 beaches. And as Mel told me earlier today, he circled 5 times to get the pictures so that Eisenhower back in England would know who was winning and who was losing. Mel looked down on one of his passes at Omaha Beach. And I'm going to let Mel tell you what he said to the crew. Mel, can you come up and just tell us what you told them when what you saw that circle and what you saw? Tell them what you told the captain.
I want to tell you, first of all, why I was there. The night before, that was on June the 5th, my commander, my aircraft commander, came into our hut and said they want us to fly one more mission. And they want our aircraft to be the one to do this. And anyway, he says it's a top secret mission. Nobody will know about it. You won't tell anybody about it. It'll be gone forever. So he says it's all volunteer. You don't have to go if you don't want to. But he says, I got to have a crew. So I asked him, I said, are you going to be the pilot? And he says, yes. I says, well, I, for one, will go with you. But out of my crew, it was only him and I on that airplane the next morning. And anyway, we took off from our base in England and flew towards France. And when we got, of course, there was thousands and thousands of ships in the water, in the North Sea, in the North, and the Channel. Everywhere you looked, there was a ship, and they were all headed towards France. And the thing is, they were already landing in France, and the Germans was setting up anti-aircraft fire, and I saw no German airplanes, but there was American airplanes and British airplanes flying up and down the beach. Anyway, as we approached the shores of France, it was just one ship after another, and the troop ships were unloading the troops into smaller ships, and the smaller ships was going towards the shore. And our airplane had 2 bird colonels up in the nose with some special equipment aboard. And that's why we were flying this special airplane. But anyway, we flew from Omaha Beach all the way to Sword Beach, and we must have made a dozen round trips. And one time, you could see airplanes were all over the sky, cargo airplanes, C-47s, some of them with gliders, and it looked like a mess. But anyway, as we approached Omaha and Utah Beach on this one trip, and I looked down into the water, and I says to the right waist gunner, I says, "Do you see what I see?" And he looked down and he says, "Yes." I says, "Well, those aren't logs. Those are bodies." And I said, "Really?" And the thing is, it was just one after another, and they were the guys were floating in towards the beach. And at that time, I got on the interphone, and we had already made a half a dozen trips back and forth from Sword Beach to Utah Beach, and then we'd turn around and go back again. But anyway, I called the pilot, and I said, "Sir, do you see what I see?" And he says, "Yes." I says, "Don't you think we've seen enough?" And he says, "Well," he says, "I'll check with the colonels up in front. We'll see if they've had enough." And sure enough, a few minutes later, he called on the intercom, and he says, "Mel, we're going to go home." And I said, "Well, thank God for that." But that was a day that lived with me for 75 years.
Thank you, Mel. Let's hear it from Mel Jackson. At Omaha Beach, we landed 34,000 men, 2,400 Americans were killed. Up at Utah Beach, we landed 25,000 men that day, 200 were killed. The Germans, in fortified defenses, they only lost 1,100 men. The Canadians, on 3 beaches, lost a total of 2,000. And the paratroopers, with 13,000, lost 2,500, including the 4,000 gliders. So 2,500 paratroopers, but Omaha Beach that he's talking about, 2,400. In the next 3 weeks, Eisenhower lands 850,000 men. We were on our way to Berlin, and the World War was going over. So thank God for people like Sergeant Mel, who had been there, who'd flown 46 missions. And what he didn't tell you was he went to Suicide Alley, Berlin, 6 times. Planes left and right shot down. He saw his buddy go down. And Mel's here to tell us about it today. Thank you very much, and God bless America.